Auburn's 2024 season is entirely dependent on the quarterback play. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on in to Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I am Auburn Daily writer Lindsay Crosby, filling in for Zac Blackerby, who is out of the country. You will hear from him tomorrow, so don't worry about that. He left us something in the time capsule before he left the country. Joined by Darrell Daprich, my co-host for the week, Montgomery radio legend. And we've done a lot of talk about Auburn football. We looked at some of the games and ranked how excited we should be for them. We talked about some of the position groups, offense, defense, guys who were going to make a big impact on this season. But I keep coming back to the ceiling, the floor, everything for this football team is entirely contingent on the offense, and specifically the quarterback play. We saw last year when you had good quarterback play or good enough quarterback play, you could hang with Georgia and Alabama. When you had bad quarterback play, you saw what that looked like in some of those blowouts. And so, Darrell, I kind of want to, let's talk about Peyton Thorne, but if something were to happen to Peyton Thorne, what could the rest of these guys do? Let's look at all four of these quarterbacks and what is the ceiling and floor with these guys? So, Peyton Thorne, obviously, what do we think the ceiling realistically is with Peyton Thorne this year? Is it 2 seasons ago at Michigan State when he had an NFL receiver with him, and I believe NFL running back too, and looked like one of the best quarterbacks in college football? If we get that kind of guy, what's the ceiling for Auburn football in 2024?
Well, I think it's very important that I want to go ahead and throw the disclaimer out that everybody thinks we focus on the quarterback position, talk through Peyton Thorne. What people need to understand is we're saying quarterbacks as a whole, even with or without Peyton Thorne. This season is driven through with the quarterback position and the narrative that lies there. So starting with Peyton Thorne, I believe that, and I've said this kind of all along, the ceiling for if he plays efficient, he doesn't have to be the Peyton Thorne that throws for 3,000 yards and 24 touchdowns, because what we talked about, how the running backs should really be able to carry the load. Mm-hmm. But I think Peyton Thorne, efficient, nice turnover ratio as far as touchdowns to interceptions, contributes with his legs. The good Peyton Thorne gets, the ceiling would be 9 wins. That's what I feel. And then the floor to me in that scenario with Peyton Thorne could be 6 wins if he if he struggles, stutters a little bit on the road, has some of the things that we saw, the bugaboos that bit him last year.
Okay, so real quick, if the ceiling's 9 wins for Peyton Thorne, what are the 3 games that you think would not be wins on this schedule? Because at Georgia, at Alabama, it feels like it's really easy to say those 2 would be games that you would lose, even in the best case scenario, which last year they were 1-score games, but they were also at home. I'm assuming those are the 2. What is the 3rd game that you think we probably would drop with Peyton Thorne still at his best?
Well, at his best, yeah, I guess that's the key. Is I'm making this realistic ceiling and floor, meaning that anybody's ceiling is 13-0. That's right. Your ceiling. That's the best you can do. Yeah. But a realistic ceiling, and what he will do realistically, I think that the Missouri game could be one on the road, on the road that Auburn could drop if he has just a mediocre game. And I'm not talking about a blowout or a 2-score game. I'm talking about a dogfight that Auburn just comes up, short. The Oklahoma game, even though it's at home and we feel like Auburn's going to win that game, Auburn goes into that game 4-0. If Oklahoma is flying and playing really, really well, that's a losable game. I mean, Oklahoma will be ranked higher and supposedly has a better roster. So either an Oklahoma or a Missouri, somewhere in there is where I think a 3rd one could be dropped to make 9 wins. Now, you could win 9 at home. You can win 9 in the regular season and then go win that bowl game, right? And then the ceiling becomes 10. So I'm speaking regular season only in this scenario, but still, that's what I think.
That makes sense. And it feels like that no matter what, you're going to have one of those fluky, weird games that could go either way because of something. I mean, I think it was Missouri 2 years ago where like they fumbled out. Was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago? They fumbled out the back of the end zone in overtime or something like that. Like weird, fluky stuff can turn a game. But it does feel like 9 to 10 wins, probably the ceiling. And even understanding you could knock off Georgia or Alabama. It's just the odds of that aren't great because they're both on the road. And then I feel like the floor definitely has to be what you just saw last year in essence, right? Handling your business for the most part at home with some late stumbles, struggling. I mean, last year feels like that's probably the floor right there for Peyton Thorne. What if Peyton Thorne wasn't available? I don't want to speculate as to what would happen, but what if you had to start Hank Brown for games? What do you think? What does that do to Auburn's 90th percentile outcome and Auburn's floor in that scenario? Is it still 9 wins? Is it 8 wins? What's the floor then?
I think just a hair below 9, somewhere around the 8 mark. And the only reason why I said that, I know he looked good in the bowl game against Maryland, but I've got to see that week in, week out. When you throw a kid that's not played one SEC snap into an SEC schedule, what's that look like? I mean, we need to be realistic. And I know I love him. He looked good in that game. He looked very mature, but that's got to be sustainable over all those conference games. If that was to happen, at what point in the season would it happen? So I think just to be realistic and not put undue expectations on a kid that's only played half of a bowl game, I'd say 8 to 8.5. I like that half thing like FanDuel uses, would be the ceiling. And then again, 6 would be the floor. I think Auburn's defense and running game is enough that if they took things away from the offense to simplify it for Hank Brown and not ask him to do too much, Auburn could still get 6 wins as a floor with that running game and the defense.
Yeah, and I think my big concerns with and really this goes for any of these guys, but Hank Brown's the one that comes to mind right away, is my concerns would be as you get deeper into the conference schedule and teams start to learn this is how he likes to play the game, they get a scouting report on him, start to see what he does. That's when I feel like you would stumble. The way that he is aggressive at moving the ball downfield and pulling the trigger, getting the ball out, makes me feel like he could be surprisingly good early in the schedule. If he had to start week 1, I mean, I genuinely feel like 4-0 could still theoretically be in play when you get to Oklahoma. But when you face that better caliber defender, teams get some film on him, some tape and some book. I feel like that probably changes things a little bit. I like bringing it down from 9, maybe to 8 or 10 to, I'm not going to go with a half game, but something like 8. That makes a little more sense to me. Does that get worse if you have to go to Holden Garner? He's been in the program for longer. He knows a lot of these players, the coaches. He has more experience around the program, but he has even less game experience than Hank Brown, and that's not saying much because Hank Brown has a half. Do you think that changes if you have to go with Holden Garner for a season?
I absolutely do. And it's because even though we've only seen Hank Brown for a half, at least we've seen Hank Brown be efficient
for a half
and be productive and be effective for a half. I'm not knocking Garner. We just haven't seen that. It's like an incomplete.
Right.
If that was Garner that came in the game, which he did, he came in the game. If he would have come in against Maryland in the bowl game and had that kind of half or whatever, completely different narrative. But it's an incomplete for me. I haven't seen him do that in a game yet. And so because of that, yeah, it drops it down a game or two for me. I think if Holden Garner was to start week 2, I think the ceiling would be 6 to 7 and the floor could be 5. And again, I know we talked about the running game but still, you still have to have the threat of the pass where Hank Brown had that, went downfield, threw a nice ball. It's not a knock against Garner. It's just experience and what we've seen, the eyeball test. So I would definitely scale that back a little bit if it was Garner that had to go.
Right. And kind of the last one here, if it was Walker White instead, true freshman, but considered to have probably more arm talent than Holden Garner. And we kind of give him some of that it factor and things like that, as well as seems like he already has some pretty decent chemistry with some of these young receivers and things like that from just workouts and stuff with him. Does that that Holden Gariner floor and ceiling change if it's Walker White, or is it kind of in that same scenario because the experience isn't really helping Holden Gariner? Would it help Walker White?
Don't want to sound contradictory because in one breath I just said we haven't seen anything on Gariner and we haven't seen anything on White. I think I would give White just a slight advantage on that floor ceiling based upon maybe offensive pedigree, what he came into this program as far as a little bit more highly touted, a little bit more highly rated, 4-star quarterback, has the pedigree, has the arm talent, that kind of thing. So just based upon that, even though the experience or lack thereof is similar with Holden Gariner, I think pedigree and arm talent has to count. Now, Gariner can spin it too now. I've watched him in warm-ups, and the ball comes out of his hand. Very, very nice. But we haven't really seen Walker White get that opportunity in a game. We have a little bit with Gariner. So the unknown factor and the pedigree, I would say Walker White might be maybe one more win than a Gariner. Somewhere between Hank Brown and Holden Gariner would be Walker White in floor ceiling.
It's an interesting little takeaway there. Yeah, and we've been kind of clear before that a lot of what's going to happen this season, no matter who the quarterback is going to be contingent on how you do on the road. Let's talk about those road games. Which ones are the easiest? Which ones are the hardest? We'll do that next right here on Locked On Auburn. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Anybody that knows me knows huge basketball fan, huge NBA guy. The NBA finals are coming up. That's obviously my dream thing. What I love more than anything is basketball. And Game Time makes getting NBA finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices for the NBA finals on the Game Time app go down the closer it gets to tip-off. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices. You can see the view from your seat, and they have a low-price guarantee, so they take all the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. The guarantee is fantastic. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less than what you paid on Game Time, they will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets for the NBA Finals with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms and conditions apply, but create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Lindsay, Crosby, Darrell, Daprich filling in for the traveling Zac Blackerby somewhere in international waters. He keeps sending me really interesting photos of all the different drinks he's having.
He sent me a really interesting video, and I'm just going to leave it at that.
Nope. Yeah. This is a wife trip. I don't want to hear about the video.
Well, no, yeah, well, they were on the beach. It was just a fun video. Yeah, let's put it that way.
So Auburn's got 4 road trips for the football this year. First one, October 5th, to Georgia. You get a bye week. And then after that, back-to-back trips at Missouri, at Kentucky, so Columbia and Lexington. And then you end the regular season. Obviously, Auburn's going to have more after that because you're going to have a bowl game. You're going to be playing a college football playoff game on campus, things like that. But you go to Tuscaloosa to take on Alabama on November 30th. So how are we ranking these 4 games as, like, in the perspective of most difficult environment to play in? Because we know that Georgia and Alabama are the 2 hardest games. But as far as the environments you're going to, that conversation about the quarterbacks got me thinking, what if you have to roll out Hank Brown for one of these? What's going to be the hardest one for him to play in because of the noise, the fans, all of that stuff? What do you have for number 1?
I have Georgia, and I think it's not only because, you take away how much of an elite program they are, even when they're not, and they're a 7-5 team, it's tough to win in Athens, and their fans are rabid, pardon the pun. And, you have grown men dressed as dogs barking at you.
Human beings barking at other human beings.
Yeah, I can't.
It's a shame.
I can't wrap my head around. But that atmosphere, even though they're the best team in the SEC, or predicted to be, is still, I think, the hardest one to win at. Because, again, when they were 8-4, I can remember Auburn teams under Tommy Tuberville being 9-10 win teams, going over to play Matthew Stafford. Georgia only had 6 wins, and Georgia smoked Auburn. And the environment was sellout. And especially because it's Auburn. I mean, that's Georgia's biggest rival. They can talk about Florida and the cocktail party and all that good stuff, but Auburn is Georgia's biggest rival. So whenever your biggest rival comes to town, you get after it. It's not Georgia Tech. It's not Tennessee. It's not Florida. It's Auburn. And so that's why I think that's the toughest environment on the schedule for Auburn to go and win in.
I can see that. I think a big part of it too is, I mean, different concerns, but like they're coming off of a road trip to Alabama when they come home for Georgia, and they've been gone for a couple weeks. They play September 7th at home, and that's the last home game until Auburn comes on October 5th. So you've got a little bit of pinned up demand for these Auburn fans, for these Georgia fans wanting you to come in. And I feel like so many of Auburn's players, like, it's different when you play Alabama. There's this, I'm not going to say it's not intimidating, but it's a different factor because it's Alabama. And I feel like it is harder to go to Athens than it is to go to Alabama. I mean, the trip is farther. Look at the time of year, the temperature, it's going to be hotter. It's a whole different animal going to Athens. I can totally see being more concerned about that than I would against Alabama. But Alabama's still clearly number 2.
Yeah.
And I think that's just because, one, the quality of the team, and 2, it's going to Alabama means something to a lot of these players who are from the state, right? Like, in state, playing at Alabama is a big deal, right? Their parents grew up watching Bear Bryant, who wore, he did not wear houndstooth. He wore checkets and plaid, but it's a big deal to go into Bryant-Denny Stadium and play Alabama. It's clearly the number 2 matchup in this, right?
It is. I think that success has bred a little bit of complacency for the Alabama fan base. It's like a business trip a lot of times. They expect to win. They expect to win going away. So the passion and the overall primal fandom is different than it was when Saban first got there. I mean, and that happens. I mean, right. Yankee Stadium became that way. Gillette Stadium in New England. It just happens, and it's a natural progression. And I think Georgia, if they're not careful, may get to that point where it's just kind of sets in. You're used to winning big, and so it's more of a business. Oh, let's go. We should be up 21 by now, that kind of thing. So they still have a very rabid fan base, very passionate fan base when Auburn comes to town and it's the Iron Bowl. But I think that they're so used to winning and have been so spoiled by winning that overall passion and just very, very, emotion is not at the same level it is at Athens right now because of the success and because of how, let's just call it, they're spoiled. The fans are spoiled. And we'll see how that plays out, under a new coach, new regime. And like I said, Georgia could get there if they're not careful.
Feel free to fact check me in the comments, folks, on YouTube, but I believe the last time Auburn won in Athens was 2005, 31-30 in 2005. Looking at the history page on Auburn football's website. Yeah. Other than that,
Brandon Cox game, fumble in the end zone, receiver picks it up. Yeah, that is a lifetime. I mean, it really is. And, that's a very, very long time to not go on the road and win a football game. You're talking about coming on 20 years in a place that Auburn used to win pretty regularly. I mean, that series was so unique that the visiting team would often win the game. So yeah, it's big. And that in itself, that's a great point, Lindsay. When you haven't won somewhere in almost 19 years, you've got to consider it probably the most difficult environment. Yeah.
To your point, despite that streak, they're still 18-17 in Athens. So they used to win a lot there. They just haven't done a lot recently.
Yeah.
Real quick, before we get out of here on the second segment, Missouri or Kentucky, which one's harder and which one's not from a purely, I guess, maybe ignoring the team quality, just like an environment standpoint? I would assume it's Kentucky, right?
No, I'm going Missouri. I think it's harder to get to. I think the success that they had last year is really going to bring out the fans big time. They're not going to be complacent. They're building upon last year. They're going to be very anticipatory as to that. And so, yeah, and again, Columbia is a little bit harder to get to. Sure. I think I'd put Missouri third, and then Kentucky just right behind them, which from what I've heard, that people that have gone on to the road trips have rated the most friendliest environments in the SEC to be Nashville and Lexington. So that being said, that's why I put Columbia third, Lexington fourth.
That makes sense. And one of the teams, I was doing research for this, one of the teams Auburn's never played until this year is New Mexico, and they will check that off the list. If we could pick teams that Auburn had never played to schedule a road trip against, who would that be? We'll do that next right here on Locked on Auburn. Final segment of the Thursday episode of Locked on Auburn. Lindsay, Crosby, Darrell, Daprich filling in for Zac Blackerby, who is traveling international waters right now. And so we kind of banded this back a little bit, talking about some of these road trips. And it's like, where have you not played that you would want to go play on the road for the experience? Thinking about the team, yes, but the fans, really. This is the one where, fan-wise, where would you go? And we have not discussed these answers. I'm 99% sure we both have Notre Dame number one.
So first of all, I want to set this premise up.
Okay.
It doesn't mean you've never played in this stadium, and it doesn't mean you've never played this team. It means you've never played this team in their home stadium, because two of the people on the list, you'll see when I explain. So yes, Notre Dame is number one. I've been to South Bend. I've been to Notre Dame Stadium, never been to a game there. I would love, as an Auburn follower, to be able to sit in Notre Dame Stadium and watch Auburn and Notre Dame. And I don't even think they've ever played in the history. You know, they've never even played. We thought a couple times they'd play in a bowl game, but Notre Dame is the slam dunk for me. I would love to go to South Bend and play the Irish.
It's odd. Alabama and Notre Dame have played 8 times. They have another home and home coming up. We've never played them. They're the only team in the top 15 in all-time wins that we've never played. So I absolutely really I do think that needs to be on the list. We've never played them in basketball either. Like football or basketball, we've never played them. I believe we've played them in baseball.
So we played them this year in basketball and beat their eyes out.
That's right, we did.
In a tournament, finally, yes.
So we have played them finally in that.
The Alabama Notre Dame thing was based upon, I'm just going to be very honest, arrogance. So for the longest time, Notre Dame would play Alabama because they felt like they were better. They were the standard. You know, Alabama played USC. It took Auburn a long time to play USC. Alabama and Notre Dame were two, powerhouses for a long time in college football. So that's why they played. It's amazing to me that Alabama's even played at South Bend a couple times, played on the road at Notre Dame. So yeah, that's a bucket list for me. That would be a fun matchup to go to. Notre Dame was my first.
Okay. Who was your number 2?
UCLA. So,
okay.
And again, Auburn's played in the Rose Bowl against Florida State. I have been 2 games at the Rose Bowl, Pac-10 games back in the day, followed Arizona. It is just picturesque and a great place to watch a football game. If you're high enough in the Rose Bowl and you're looking out at the mountains, it's just a really, really neat place to go, watch and play a football game in the Rose Bowl. It's just history, it's tradition. So that's why I chose UCLA to play them at their home stadium.
Okay. We actually have different answers here. My number 2 is Ohio State. We've played Ohio State twice. We played them in 1990 in Tampa in a bowl game, beat them 31-14. We played them in 1917 in a neutral site game in Montgomery. It was a 0-0 tie. Very stalkerish.
I called that game at Crampton Bowl. I was on the mic at Crampton Bowl, yeah.
Your second career after you retired, you started doing broadcasting.
I remember that 1990 bowl game because that's the game that Stacey Danley almost got killed.
I thought you meant 1917. I thought you were making an old joke, and you meant 1917.
I did make an old joke. I did.
Okay.
I just transitioned that was the first year I moved here, and I was watching that bowl game, and Stacey Danley almost got killed early in the game on a little swing pass, and Pat Dye told him, get off the field, run off the field. We don't want that linebacker to know that he hurt you. Right. And then Auburn came back and smoked. It was 14-0, and Auburn had like 31 unanswered. That was a fun bowl game to watch.
There we go. Okay, so last 2 teams. Okay. Who do you have for 3 and 4? Did you have Ohio State in there?
No, close. I had Michigan, the big house. Now we've played Michigan in bowl games, just like we Played them in the Citrus Bowl. Ronnie Daniels and Ben Leards last year, I believe, played them. It was back then. It was called the Citrus Bowl. So I like the fact that you would go there with 100,000 in maize and blue and getting after it, and it would be fun to play them. You would never do it because you play them early in the year, but I would love a weather game. I would just love to see, and I know people say, well, I would love to see Auburn in November where it's blustery and cold and snow's coming and play Michigan on the road. So, yeah, Michigan was my number 3.
Do a home and home. We go there in like early November, but they come here like week 2.
Yeah.
I want it to be 98 degrees with 110% humidity in Alabama. And I want to see them try to hang the whole game. It would be tons of fun. So I think that's probably a pretty good matchup. The last time they played was 2001. It was a bowl game. They also played 1984.
Who's your 1984 one that would have won the national championship with the Al Del Greco kick and the Sugar Bowl. Yeah.
Yeah. Mine was actually UCLA. Same reason. Coliseum. Cool. Getting the chance to go, to that, play in that iconic stadium against the team that actually is supposed to be there and not a national championship. Although I'm not opposed to go in there again if it's for a national championship. But getting to see that, I think, would be really cool. Who's your number 4 real quick?
Virginia Tech.
Enter Sandman.
Played him in the Sugar Bowl. It was between Virginia Tech and Wisconsin just for environment, atmosphere, aura. But I've, looked at stuff, and that entrance is iconic. And Auburn's played Virginia Tech in the Sugar Bowl in 2004. But I would love to play them in Blacksburg and be a part of that fan scene. I think that would be cool.
I was talking to a friend of mine who lives out west about this show we were going to do, and he said, you have to go to BYU. Lavelle Edwards Stadium is absolutely gorgeous. And so, you know what? I was like, sure. I don't know how fun the trip would be for Auburn fans hanging out in Salt Lake City and things like I've heard it's fine. Questions about how much fun stuff there is to do there. But the game itself would be absolutely gorgeous. So I think that'd be a fun one there.
Yeah, you're not even in Salt Lake City. You're in Provo, Utah, which is even more kind of locked down. Not much to do, button up, to be honest with you. Had a couple friends in high school that went and played football at BYU. And the unique thing about that, it is picturesque with the mountains. But now that would not be a group of 5 game like it was a couple years ago. Now you'd be playing it because they're in the Big 12.
A Power 5 team, yeah.
A Power 5 team. So that would be a fun one. I actually, that entered my mind when I was making this list besides Wisconsin and Virginia Tech. So that's a good one. That's
one of my runner-ups for best fan trip was Arizona State too. I just think that'd be tons of fun for the fans to go party out there for a weekend.
You wouldn't recover, brother. I've been there, done that. Let me tell you, being an Arizona guy, I've been to many games in Sun Devil Stadium. Yeah. And and that rivalry is a lot more. It's beautiful out there. The desert, it's fun. Their stadiums are nice. And the heat is oppressive in September. Don't let anybody tell you about that dry heat stuff. Oven. An oven is dry, and it's still very, very warm.
Good analogy. I like that. Darrell, where can folks go to give you more love, find more of your stuff?
Follow me on Twitter or X, DAP6410, Wednesdays and Fridays with Zach, Monday mornings with Ben Taylor on WANI, and then Tuesday afternoons at 3:15 on the line with Jacob Goins.
That'll do it for today's episode of Locked on Auburn. Stay tuned. Zach is here tomorrow on a time capsule episode, another crossover kind of preview thing we're doing. Darrell and I will see you guys again on Monday. This has been Locked on Auburn.